It was a chilly autumn evening. After a long day's work, we decided to make the trip out to Blackwood Memorial Park, the cemetery about an hour outside the city. The cemetery where her father was buried, because today would have been his 61st birthday. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape, and a thick fog began to roll in, adding an eerie atmosphere to our journey. As we drove down the narrow winding road, the trees on either side seemed to close in on us, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. My wife Emily sat silently beside me, clutching a bouquet of white anemones, her father's favorite flower. She had always been close to him, and his sudden passing had left a void in her heart that nothing could fill. We arrived at the cemetery just as darkness fell. The iron gates creaked open. As we exited the car, I made sure to close my door with a decent amount of force. The latches on this rusted chariot of ours were starting to show their age, occasionally preventing the doors from closing securely. Emily's door closed softly, but way out here. And at this time, I thought that the chances of encountering anybody willing to rummage through our eyesore of a vehicle if a door hadn't properly latched closed were pretty slim. So I kept the thought to myself. She had other thoughts on her mind right now. We made our way to her father's grave, guided only by the dim light of the two dated flashlights that we happened to find in the car's trunk. The cemetery was old, with weathered tombstones and overgrown weeds. It felt as though we were stepping back in time, into a place forgotten by the world. As we stood by the grave, Emily whispered a few words to her father, her voice trembling with emotion. I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but my attention was drawn to a rustling sound nearby. I turned my flashlight towards the noise, but saw nothing. Just the wind, I told myself. We spent a few more moments in silence before deciding to leave. As we walked back to the car, the rustling sound grew louder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I quickened my pace, urging Emily to do the same. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the fog, blocking our path. It was a man, or at least it had been, once. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale and decayed. His eyes, empty and lifeless, stared at us with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. Before I could react, more figures appeared, surrounding us. They moved slowly, but with a determination that was terrifying. Emily clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. We had to get out of there, but there was no escape. The creatures closed in, their cold, clammy hands reaching for us. I fought them off as best as I could, but there were too many. Emily screamed as one of them lunged at her. I pushed it back with every ounce of strength I had, losing my balance in the process. As I tumbled toward the thick green ground, a sharp pain shot through me as my head struck one of the countless angel-shaped stones, snapping off a corner of its wing. I watched the broken piece fall to the ground, landing inches in front of my eyes. The world began to spin. We were in trouble. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, I heard a voice calling my name. It was Emily, but she sounded distant, as if she were miles away. I tried to reach out to her, but my strength was fading. The last thing I saw was her tear-streaked face, and then everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the cold, damp ground. The fog had thickened, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. My head throbbed with pain, and I could feel the warmth of my own blood trickling down my temple. Emily was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as I struggled to my feet. I called out her name, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I had to find her. I couldn't leave her alone in this nightmare. I stumbled through the cemetery, my flashlight flickering as the batteries began to die. The tombstones seemed to loom over me, their inscriptions barely visible in the dim light. I felt as though I was being watched, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. After what felt like hours, I found Emily. She was huddled behind a large mausoleum, her eyes wide with terror. She had a few scratches and bruises, but she was alive. Relief washed over me as I pulled her into my arms. "We have to get out of here," I whispered, my voice shaking. "We need to find help." Emily nodded. We began to make our way back to the car. The creatures were still out there, lurking in the shadows, but we moved as quickly and quietly as we could. Every step felt like a struggle, but we couldn't afford to stop. As we neared the gates, I heard a low growl behind us. I turned, only to see one of the creatures lunging in our direction, its eyes filled with a malevolent hunger. I pushed Emily ahead and spun myself to face it, ready to fight for our lives. The creature was strong, its grip like iron. I struggled to break free, but it was relentless. Just as it was about to overpower me, Emily appeared with a large branch, striking the creature across the head. It stumbled back, giving us a moment to escape. We ran through the gates and into the car, slamming the doors shut behind us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, but finally managed to start the engine. The creatures fading into the distance. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight as Emily and I sped down the road, our hearts still pounding from the harrowing escape. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to cling to us as if refusing to let go. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine. I tried to calm my racing heart, but the memory of those lifeless eyes and outstretched hands haunted me. As we drove, a strange feeling crept over me. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were not alone. I turned to look at Emily. Her face was pale, and her eyes wide with fear. She peered over her shoulder to the car's back seat. Her voice was barely audible as she whispered softly,